So I'm just gonna say this once. This video is gonna be spoiler heavy. So if you haven't seen Star Wars The Last Jedi, I suggest not watching this. But if you feel like, hey, I wanna take a chance, I'm just letting you know, you've been warned. Rian Johnson made a very bold decision in redefining the tone of a Star Wars film, and honestly, I think the franchise needed it. I think he took Kylo Ren's advice and let the past die, and I think he wants all of us to do the same. And to be quite honest, I'm on board. So for the past 2 years, we've all been patiently waiting to see what happens after Rey arrives on Luke's isolated island. She's standing there with her arm extended, holding his father's lightsaber, and we've been waiting for 2 years and we want to know what happens. Well, the best possible thing that I think could have happened actually happened. Luke takes the lightsaber into his possession. He's got his robot hand when Darth Vader cut off his hand, his own father cut off his hand, and he takes one look at Rey and throws the lightsaber behind him off of a cliff. This scene set the tone for the rest of this particular film, and I think for every film that's going to follow. I really like the fact that it's not taking itself too seriously and is bringing us back to this very well-needed, light-hearted humor that existed in the original trilogy. Because you see, the problem is, for the past 40 years, we've been romanticizing the idea of what a Star Wars film is or what a Star Wars film should be. And what does that mean? Yes, sometimes there is a very serious tone. There's lightsaber duels, there's aerial battles, and some of the best action sequences, and I think some of the most memorable action sequences that you'll ever get to see. But they were also filled with all of these lovable characters, these witty one-liners.
Why, you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder!
And they had the freedom of creating this wonderful legacy that we all know and love because the legacy hadn't been born yet. And I almost feel like The Force Awakens, being the first movie, the first installment in what we know as the final trilogy, was very much trapped in dogma. It had to satisfy all of those fans that have romanticized the idea of what a Star Wars movie is. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I was one of those people. But like I said earlier, I'm very glad that Rian Johnson made the conscious decision to reinvent the tone of a Star Wars film to bring us back to a place of freedom and give us some room to breathe. So a really great example of how this movie didn't really take itself so seriously is I think they had a little bit more fun when it comes to the dialogue. Because funny dialogue breaks up the looming doom that the galaxy is facing to kind of bring us back to a familiar feeling of joy. And one example that comes to mind is when Rey is trying to convince Luke Skywalker to leave the island and rejoin the Rebel Alliance. He's denied her multiple times. He keeps walking away from her. He keeps telling her to go away. He just mopes around pretty much all day. He hunts for fish when he's hungry. And he spends a lot of time just staring off into the distance. But after she's followed him around for what looks like a few days, she's trying to convince him once again to join her and go back to the Rebel Alliance, and she says, "I've seen your daily routine. You're not busy." Listen, I'm not doing the joke any justice. In context, it's pretty funny. But on that note, Daisy Ridley once again delivered a fantastic performance as Rey, the one that we now know comes from nothing. I said there were going to be spoilers. And I am so glad that Rey is not a Skywalker, she's not a Kenobi, she's not a Solo like everyone predicted, because if she was a descendant of our legacy cast, then that would make the entire fate of the galaxy and this entire story based around one group of friends, and that would make the galaxy and the story seem very small. Now, it's public knowledge that Mark Hamill fundamentally disagreed with every decision made for the Luke Skywalker character in this film. And yeah, the Luke that we see in this movie is definitely not the Luke I think everyone expected, but if you really think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Now, stay with me here. So when it comes to the original trilogy and the prequels, the battle between light and dark has always been pretty black and white. But the problem with that is that as an audience, we've always sided with the light, not realizing the hypocrisy of it all. As we all know, light cannot exist without dark. If there was no dark, what would light contrast with? And vice versa. Just like good cannot exist without bad, because if bad wasn't a thing, then what really is good? Imagine it this way. Let's say everyone in the world was good at performing a particular task. Everybody was good at it. Wouldn't that mean that everyone is at the same skill level and we're all just pretty average at it? It's kind of like when Syndrome says, when everyone's super, no one will be. And as we've seen in the prequels, the Jedi Order in their heyday, when there were a lot of Jedi, They were very aggressively trying to wipe out the Sith Lords that embodied the dark side of the Force, not realizing that that wouldn't bring balance to the Force at all. If you have a lot of Jedi, a large population of Jedi, and they wipe out all of the Sith, then there's only light. There is no dark side. That's not balance. And as we watch Obi-Wan Kenobi's heart break as he screams out to Anakin, "It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them. Bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness." That's Obi-Wan speaking through the lens of his ever so famous point of view. The same point of view that kept the truth from Luke when he told him that his father was dead. But in reality, when Anakin gave into the dark side and killed off most of the Jedi, he pretty much did balance out the Force. This is something that I think Luke now understands in The Last Jedi. He is enlightened to this ominous understanding of both light and dark. He has now realized how blindly he and the rest of the Jedi Order were following their own agenda just like the Sith were. And now all of this and this entire concept brings us to my favorite scene in the film, which is the appearance of Yoda. We are once again introduced to the Yoda that we met on Dagobah. He was silly, he was funny, he cracked jokes.
How you get so big to do food of this kind?
And he didn't take himself too seriously. He was a Muppet that was not only wise, but he was also very funny. And he used his sense of humor to portray his wisdom. Because you can see in this film that he's not taking the whole light and dark side thing too seriously. He knows, just like Luke does, that the Jedi has to end. Now, I do want to mention this, it's kind of a side note, but this is the first time in any Star Wars film after the original trilogy where I felt that same kind of magic that I did when I watched the original trilogy. I think the appearance of Yoda and the way that they portrayed him was very much in tune with the overall feeling of the original movies, and I think they tapped into something very special. I was pretty surprised with how much they developed Poe's character. I mean, he was pretty important in this film. He became a commander, well, then was demoted to a captain, but we saw a lot more emotion in him. We saw his decision-making, we saw his passion, how passionate he is for the rebellion, and I thought that was a great way to develop that character, because really all he did in The Force Awakens was fly an X-Wing and have an everlasting bromance with Finn that was pretty much based on almost nothing. And I have to say, I am pleasantly surprised with Adam Driver's portrayal of Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi. I think he did a fantastic job in convincing the audience that he may once again return to the light. I mean, if you think about it, it's probably pretty hard to portray yourself as this ruthless Sith Lord and also have this sensitive side and make it believable. In fact, I think he's the first one to pull it off in the entire storyline. Sorry, Hayden. And I'm very glad that Leia had a bigger part in this film. I mean, we saw a little bit of her in The Force Awakens, but she was a very different Leia. All she really talked about was getting Ben back. I didn't see any of that fire, any of that charisma, her leadership. You didn't really see a lot of that. And I'm also glad that they included that scene where Leia's floating in space and she's gonna die, but she uses the Force to bring her back to her ship. I always thought that Leia would make an amazing Jedi, and we never really got to experience what that was like, but we saw her at least use the Force. I'm satisfied. So the Force communication between Kylo Ren and Rey, I thought it was an interesting concept, and again, I'm glad that they're trying different things. There's this newfound freedom. And while I was watching the film, I was very curious in where they were going with it. There's a point where Kylo Ren and Rey ask each other, can they see each other's surroundings? So I thought what they were doing, I thought that Kylo Ren was using this Force communication to see where Rey was so that he can then go find her and Luke Skywalker and kill them. And then for a split second, I thought that through this Force communication that Kylo Ren can actually teleport, because there's that scene in the hut where they're sitting next to each other. But then very quickly I realized, no. What they're doing here is they're establishing that through Force communication, you can experience the sense of touch, and that will be important later. But the fact that I realized that actually made the end with Luke Skywalker a little anticlimactic. Because every scene that flashes back to when Kylo Ren officially fell to the dark side, Luke's hair is short and he has a black beard. So when you see him at the end, he's all of a sudden inside this impenetrable cave. No one can get in or out, and he has the short hair and the black beard. That was also later confirmed when Kylo Ren sees him and uses the AT-AT walkers to obliterate him with lasers, and then Luke is just still standing there and he does his little... So I knew throughout the ending that he wasn't actually there and he was using this force communication concept, I'll just call it. And it made the scene actually drag on for me a little bit because I knew it was gonna happen. But listen, I didn't not like the scene. I feel like if I didn't figure it out, I would have really liked that ending, and I'm sure for many other people in the audience, it was great. But I think I just figured it out too early. So a few other things that I wasn't particularly fond of. I didn't really like the casino scene. I could have done without that. I understand why they put it in. Listen, I get it. I understand the message. But I feel like it was almost like written by somebody else or written and directed by someone else, and they kind of just like merged it. And the entire scene with the racetrack and everything that happened on that planet, in that system, I just didn't really understand the point. And by the way, I think Benicio del Toro is the master code breaker. It just hasn't been revealed to us yet. I don't know why they wouldn't do it in this film, but I do think that he made the deal with the Empire to actually save Finn and Rose. And that brings me to Finn and Rose. I think that the relationship between Finn and Rose, or whatever Rose thinks their relationship is, very much suffers from the same issues and problems that existed in The Force Awakens when it comes to everyone's friendship. When Finn meets Poe, they're best friends. When Finn meets Rey, I don't know what they are. Are they friends? They might be romantically interested in each other, but it happens so fast and it's not really believable. In Star Wars A New Hope, when Luke meets Han, it's very confrontational. I mean, Luke almost walks away. He's like, I don't need this.
But who's gonna fly it, kid? You?
You bet I could. I'm not such a bad pilot myself. We don't have to sit here and listen.
When Han and Leia meet, all they do is bicker and argue. I mean, that could also be perceived as flirting, and in a lot of ways it was. But they aren't attached to each other right away. They're really not. Han is a little bit more flirtatious, and either Leia is playing hard to get, or she's really just not interested in him. And let's not forget that Han tried to skip out at the end of A New Hope. He got his reward money and he was gonna leave. It wasn't until later when he shows up in the Millennium Falcon and helps Luke destroy the Death Star did he redeem himself. So my point to all of this is that in the original trilogy, our main cast of characters had to earn each other's trust. It didn't just come out of nowhere. They weren't just best friends out of nowhere. And that made all of their friendships stronger and more believable to us as an audience. I guess you can say the relationships in these new movies are a little forced. So I think it's pretty obvious that I'm a very big Star Wars fan, and I have been for a very long time, and I'm sure many of you are diehard Star Wars fans. That's why you're watching this video. So with that being said, I would love to know what your opinions were on Star Wars The Last Jedi. Let me know if you agree with anything that I said, or if you had any other opinions or theories. I would love to hear them. I love to geek out about this stuff. That's why I do this. And of course, thank you for tuning in and listening to me rant about Star Wars. If you like these videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. It's all at Geek Level Asian. I'm very active on there. So again, let me know what you think in the comments, and may the Force be with you.